Hey, so another official welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our undergraduate summer fellowship in the digital humanities. Again, this is our culminating presentation, and my name is Madeline Dickerson. I'm the head of digital scholarship services at UC Irvine Libraries. And it's been such a pleasure to be part of the fellowship program this summer. So today marks the official end of a 10-week program in which our two undergraduate fellows will have an opportunity to share information about the research that they conducted this summer. They're going to demonstrate a prototype project and then have a chance to reflect on their experience a little bit. Our agenda for the day is I'll give a brief overview of the program and then introduce our fellows, who will each spend some time describing their research topics and showing off their digital prototypes, which both happen to involve chronology and timelines, but they've approached them in a different way. And then we'll have some time for questions from the audience. So I just have some feeling that this is not actually recording, but hopefully it is. But did you get the recording in progress button? All right, well now this comment will be part of the recording, so that's fine. All right. I don't have that little red button on my screen. So at any rate, this is the second year that we've had the undergraduate summer fellowship in digital humanities program. And the 10-week program has run from about mid-June to the end of August. And it provides undergraduate students in the humanities with an introduction to digital humanities tools and methods, and then supports them while they design and prototype a project. So in the first half of the summer, we focused on overviews of different digital humanities research methods, things like digital storytelling, mapping, text analysis. We also had some sort of practical sessions on things like project management. And then the fellows met with subject mentors from the UCI libraries to support their topical research, and then one-on-one consultations and just sort of informal get-togethers to talk about how things are going and what questions people were having. So this second half of the fellowship transitioned to that more independent work. The fellows created a project proposal based on their topic. And the idea for the project proposal was for them to dream big. Like, what would you do if you had all the time and resources in the world? And how would you apply digital humanities research methods and tools to your research topic? Why would you pick specific tools? How are they relevant to your topic? So those were some of the questions that the fellows used as guideposts. The fellows were then able to take one element of their dream proposal, as it were, and build a sample prototype, which is one of the things they're going to show us today. The fellowship program has been generously funded by a donor through the School of Humanities and has been a partnership between the School of Humanities and UCI libraries. Many people have been involved in coordinating and developing this program, which again is in its second year. Professors Deanna Shemick and Yang Chen of the School of Humanities originated the idea and approached the library originally last year for the inaugural program. I worked with the students throughout the summer with additional check-ins from Professors Shemick and Chen. We also had some wonderful administrative coordination from Brittany Pinney in the School of Humanities. I'm also really happy to announce that our new research librarian for digital humanities, April Urban, is here, and she joined us in July, and she got right into it. She started joining the meetings. She's already made an impact on the program through mentorship and advice. She reviewed the project proposals from the fellows and attended our sessions. And I also want to thank Nicole Arnold and Scott Stone, who are our two library mentors. They met with both of our fellows to provide disciplinary research support, and we really appreciate them. But of course, most importantly, I would like to introduce you to this year's fellows. There are two of them. Janelle Samkem is an incoming third-year comparative literature major with minors in informatics and creative writing. And whether in academic or personal context, she loves a good story. She's going to tell a good story today and strives to seek out more of them. Janelle's research topic centers on Cambodian music, and she explores pop music during wartime period in the mid-20th century. And Josh Chan is our other fellow this year. Born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, Josh is an upcoming fourth-year English major with a minor in Japanese language and literature and political science. And for his research topic, Josh explored the culture and history of Japanese Americans in Hawaii through Shirokiya, a store that served as a gathering place for the community and for younger generations to learn about their heritage through elder crafts and exhibits. So with that being said, I would love to turn the reins over to Janelli, who is going to start things off with her presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and you should be able to go ahead and do that. Or, you know what? Yeah, why don't we do that? You can do that.
Can anybody see that? All right. So once again, hi, my name is Janelli Samcam, and thank you all so much for coming. And this is going to be my presentation on Cambodian music, specifically from the 1950s to the 1970s. So first of all, a little bit about Cambodia. So Cambodia is a Southeast Asian country best known for its grandiose Buddhist temples, such as the Angkor Wat, as well as its era during the Khmer Rouge regime and time. The Khmer Rouge was a communist group that took control of the Cambodian government in 1975 and to 1979. And during that time, they have taken the lives of 1.5 million to 2 million Cambodians, which is about 1/4 of its population at the time. This whole project will be focused on showcasing how community, authoritative control, and culture have work together hand in hand to eliminate values from past societies through eliminating the arts and the artists, or at least how the Khmer Rouge have tried to do that. And so once again, this time frame will be from the 1950s until the 1970s, and then focusing a little bit on what Cambodian music looks like today. And all in all, this project will want to focus on how international influences have affected the Cambodian pop scene and present these stories in a community-centered way. Although for the sake of the prototype, it'll be a little bit more focused on facts, just for the sake of overview. So to kick off my research narrative, I focused mainly on before the 1950s, so around the 40s and things like that, where I discuss how things like Cambodian traditional music that can often be found in temples and at festivals have sort of combined with influence from France and Latin America as records started entering the Cambodian marketplace. And then we jump all the way to 1953, in which Cambodia gained independence from the French and put the king Norodom Sihanouk into place and into government power. And Norodom Sihanouk himself has a pretty strong, or had a pretty strong pull towards music and passion for music. And so by using music and other forms of culture, he wanted to propel Cambodia to be more modern, or his definition of modern, which would be using different influences from around the world in music. And then we continue on to the 1960s. And in the 1960s, we see this huge growth in Cambodian pop music, and it's really starting to settle in its true beginnings. More specifically, Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia, gains the nickname the Pearl of Southeast Asia for its beautiful architecture as well as its growing music scene, where people would flock around the country to go and get their voices heard on the radio and things just like that. During this time, we also see a huge rise in stars such as Sin Sisamut, Rosa Resapia, and the king himself, Norodom Sihanouk, who both sang and composed music for the stars, and rock bands, and so many other people who started entering this music scene. However, during this time, we also do see that there are some economic disparities between the upper and the lower classes, as the lower classes feel a lot more unsupported by the governments in their endeavors. Also, because Cambodia at this point was very newly independent, there was a lot of political instability during this time. So the Khmer Rouge, which established itself within the 1940s, gained a lot of members up until the 60s and started throwing a lot of riots and other types of violences around the country. During this time, the king at the time, King Norodom Sihanouk, was also overthrown and replaced by another government official who was in very strong support of America. And so by the end of the 1960s, so about 69 to around the 70s, civil war begins between the Khmer Rouge, which is backed by China and with its communist values of running things, and the new Cambodian government, which is backed by Americans and other people who want to establish things their own way. And onto the 1970s, we see that the Khmer Rouge wins the Civil War in 1975. And so in 1975 all the way to 1979, the Khmer Rouge takes over society and turns Cambodia into an agriculture-based society. During their reign, they also once again killed 1.5 to 2 million people, which is once again 1/4 of the population. And within those numbers included people's like intellectuals, so people who went to school, scholars and doctors and everyone, politicians and other people associated with governments like police officers and their families, and ethnic minorities and people who were considered to be representations of popular culture. So being a musician in the 1970s meant that these ex-stars who really loved their music and sharing out these different songs would actually have to sing songs provided by the Khmer Rouge. So they'd be forced to perform, travel in tropes around the country, and share out these songs with these specific messages that the Khmer Rouge wanted them to sing. And if they had refused to do that, or they were found out or something happened, they would be killed. During this time too, records and magazines and other things that resembled pop music culture or pop culture in general and were discovered by the Khmer Rouge were destroyed. And so a lot of the pop songs that were used to play out in the streets and for people to enjoy were replaced by nationalistic songs for people who worked in the farms to listen to all day long, or whenever those troops came around. Now, if I were to continue on with this project and make a huge project out of it, I would have 3 main components, which is a timeline, a Google Maps, and oral histories. So the timeline, which is the prototype I'll be showing you today, is a general overview of all the topics that I wanted to touch upon within the website itself, and link some YouTube videos that have the music from the actual time period from which they were singing all these songs from, just to give the user a very sonic understanding of what Cambodia kind of sounded like at the time. Moving on, I would also be doing a Google Maps. So that would be a more detailed overview of sort of the little things that affected the Cambodian pop scene. As I've mentioned a little bit here and there were things like records and different people from around the world and other things and events that have definitely impacted Cambodia. So I'd want to highlight those places and those events and link them to both time and place by using some Google Maps functions to display all of that. I would also want to go into my some oral histories by looking at places online, or if I had enough time and money, you know, going out to Cambodia and talking to people who lived during that time period or generations afterwards who are still affected by it, and discuss how music has impacted them and what that really means to them. And maybe even traveling to places with a lot of Cambodian immigrants like Long Beach, California, or in Australia and places like that, to see how this has affected their family's immigration story and their connection to culture. And putting it all on a website and different web pages. So my work plan is pretty straightforward and simple. I would do some primary research, as I already have, on EBSCO, JSTOR, UCI libraries, the really good websites we all know. And then I would just take those PDFs and those videos and just annotate them and take notes on them. Next up, I'd work on my timeline, which is my prototype, and then pick out primary medias for that and write captions for each event. Then I work on those Google Maps and write and collect different data types for that as well. And then move on to oral histories, where I'd collect those quotes and put them and organize them in a way that is very digestible and assemble it all on a singular website. So my prototype is a timeline, and right over here, you'll see that I have demonstrated what I kind of visualized it to be at the end of it. So if you look at the timeline in a second, you'll see that the 1950s and the 1960s are quite blended together, and they have like a lot of different components to them that kind of ease within each other. So because of that, I like to say that the 50s and 60s were a total showcase of what the beginning looks like. And then from the 70s and the 79s and everything like that marks the end of it. So it becomes more of an abrupt stop, almost as if there's no middle between the two. And then I jump all the way to the 2020s, so modern day, where we kind of observe how Cambodian music is looking like and how it's a little bit of a reflection of what it kind of looked like in the 50s and 60s, which I'll get more into. All right, so if we take a look at this prototype. So this is what the prototype looks like. I have a special notes on how everything would be organized because the sounds of Cambodia are a little bit different because of that difference between the upper classes and the lower classes. And then I also do have some demonstrations of music from right here, which is the traditional kinds of sounds that you would hear. I don't know if you can hear it, but I will play small clippets throughout the timeline just for a little. All right, and then I do also have some of those French and Latin American songs that we played earlier. And then some access to radios and just a little bit of culture during that time. And some notes on some famous singers as well. And let's play this one for a little bit.
I can't actually hear it, so I'm assuming others aren't in the same boat, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Then I'll just leave it to you then. Thank you so much. Then we'll just skip ahead onto some more songs that are more traditional from when the Khmer Rouge entered the scene. And then this song that is that kind of marks one of the earliest releases when the Khmer Rouge is ousted from government positions and the Vietnamese government takes over. And then once again, skipping to these modern pop songs. And then just a quick reflection on everything. If I've learned anything from this whole fellowship, it's that digital humanities can be a lot more interactive compared to just reading off a paper, things like that, which makes it a really unique experience for readers and other users. And it makes ideas a lot more expansive and exciting for the future, and it makes outreach a lot stronger and different things like that in terms of sharing ideas. And from this fellowship, I also learned a lot about different tools like Trello and Zotero. Although I have used Trello in the past, I think my knowledge of using it has definitely expanded, and I've definitely gotten better at project management because of it. And Zotero has definitely changed my entire way I research, and I think I've gained so much, and I can't imagine researching without Zotero anymore. It keeps everything so organized, and I love it. And then up next, if I were to continue, I'd want to explore things like maps, as I said earlier, with the Google Maps implementation into the websites, as well as interactive narrative tools like Twine, as we briefly discussed in our meetups. As I do have an interest in studying video games, specifically as narratives. So the idea of using an interactive narrative tool in a humanities-based research design and comparing that to video games is a very interesting relationship that I could see in terms of relating to interactivity and everything as well. And if there was one issue that I did come up while I was researching, it was being selective while also kind of being desperate for different sources. As I mentioned earlier, Cambodian music was destroyed during this period of time. And because of that, I wanted to pick very specific songs and things like that, but I had to weigh out my pros and cons. Like this song is probably more representative of this time period, but the audio quality is bad and this and that. And I think overall for managing a digital humanities project in comparison to a paper, you have to weigh out a lot more pros and cons and accounting for what the user sees rather than how rhetoric is portrayed and things like that, that I'm not exactly used to, but have definitely enjoyed learning about. Anyways, this is my bibliography, and thank you all so much for listening. And if you have any questions, please do let me know.
Thank you so much. That's so wonderful. And if you don't mind, if you're willing to share the link to your timeline in the chat, then folks can listen to some of the songs. And we'll have time at the end for questions. So if you have some questions for Janelle, jot them down, and we'll have a question period after our next presenter. So thank you again. So Josh, you are up. Feel free to share your screen. You may need to stop sharing yours. Janelle, if you didn't already. There we, oh, never mind, sorry, looking at my own screen, okay.
Can you see everything? Okay, so hi, my name is Josh, and my project is titled From Gannen Mono to Generating a New Local Aesthetic, the Shirokiya story. And Gannen Mono is essentially the name for the first wave, even before the first generation of immigrants to Hawaii, the first less than 1,000 people. And then in the background, you'll be able to see the mon for Shirokiya, which is essentially a crest that's given to distinguished businesses or families. And for my abstract, I identified Shirokiya as a topic because of sort of the trends that I was seeing as a result of the pandemic, where you see gentrification and privatization basically accelerating these loss of third places and community that were already going on prior to the pandemic. It's the loss of small businesses and areas to basically congregate. And here at the bottom, I outline the definition of the third place, which has its origin in sociology for places that are outside of work and home, basically places that are low profile and easily accessible for regulars to congregate and exchange ideas and stories, basically. So Shirokiya was a branch of a larger chain of stores in Japan. And I'm primarily going to focus on the store in Ala Moana Center, which is located in Honolulu, Hawaii. And it's the largest open air mall in the world. And the loss of the store as a result of the pandemic was a significant loss of third places for people in Hawaii. And this absence of a place of multi-general cultural exchange. So through this presentation, I'll show how I've used digital library research strategies and methods to capture the evolution of Shirokiya along with the Japanese Americans of Hawaii. Their sort of concurrent evolution from the Gannen Mono and the Ise, the first generation of immigrants that moved to work on sugar plantations. Basically, their evolution to their descendants who helped sort of spawn cultivate this bourgeoisie boom for future generations. For my research narrative, I start off in Japan, in the capital, what is now the current capital of Japan, Tokyo, in this particular business district, which is Nihonbashi, and Shirokiya, which directly translates to white tree, opens as this sort of lumber business that eventually expands into cloth and textiles, specifically kimono. And today I decided to wear an aloha shirt, which sort of demonstrates the sort of historical cultural impact of Japanese in Hawaii, where textile patterns that were originated in kimono inspired the creation of aloha shirts, which is otherwise known as Hawaiian shirts abroad. And then the Shirokiya business would grow over time for the next hundreds of years, but then would in the mid 20th century would face a lot of struggles as a result of fires and competition with its main competitor, Mitsukoshi. So then it gets absorbed by the Tokyu Group, which is basically seeking to expand itself into retail in 1958, which allows the brand to expand overseas, to have its first overseas location in Honolulu in 1959. And then I sort of target statehood, which comes just a few months earlier as this sort of important part of the evolution of the store, where statehood represents a significant expansion of representation for Hawaii, but then also Japanese Americans, as Japanese Americans represented 30% of the population at the time. And as the store evolves, you can see sort of with the the expansion of Japanese Americans as a with their expansion of their socio-political influence and their the socio-political influence, the cultural influence, and basically a confidence in their cultural production, being able to look back and embrace where they come from in their future endeavors. So then I also identified the rebranding of the flagship store in Japan, losing the Shirokiya name and going under Tokyu, which is a sort of superficial distinction, but it symbolically represents the branching off of the Shirokiya stores in Hawaii as a unique cultural property, not simply as a traditional department store model, but serving as a gathering place, an exchange, serving as a bridge between Japanese products and Japanese in Hawaii, but then also the the past of Japanese Americans Hawaii and their descendants. And then I identified a sort of grassroots movement in the 2000s where, as a result of the Japanese bubble economy bursting in the 90s, they began to sell off a lot of assets, especially overseas assets. But then there's this grassroots movement in the 2000s that eventually garners 40,000 signatures that helps revive the store, and the parent company in Japan sells it off to the local executives for $1. And basically through the Hawaii State Legislature and Senator Daniel Inouye, who's of Japanese descent and was elected to the Senate in 1962, has this sort of cultural voice for Japanese Americans in Hawaii, and garners the sort of grassroots support necessary to motivate the second generation managers of the store to help with this revival, to keep the store going. So for my methodology, for my ideal project would include a website that serves as basically a home base for all these modules that delve into the history and then allow the user to experience what it was like to be in the store essentially. So in the history sense, I will focus on a timeline, which is part of my prototype that I will show you later. And then it would also include an oral history page that revolves around interviews with managers and workers and just general customers, especially elders who would frequently visit the store. And then for experience, I would include a map of the store while also including general immigration patterns from Japan to show sort of the main sort of centers of cultural influence that's drawn from immigrants to Hawaii. And then I will also use this. So in this photo is a website for a tool called Drive and Listen, which allows you to basically listen to indigenous radio stations while having a video that drives you around a particular location. So with this sort of hypothetical project, I would use 360 footage of inside the store and incorporate sort of the songs you would hear, especially from Showa Pop, which is the period from World War II to 1989 when Emperor Showa was in reign. That's the primary period where you would hear music from that period in the store. And then I would also have a community page, which would draw upon user submissions of photos and stories and anecdotes to basically engage with the history of the store. So for the work plan, I would reach out to the University of Hawaii and various special interest groups like the Japanese Cultural Center, the Okinawan Cultural Center, to basically gather all these informations and reach out to their contacts and crowdsource a lot of these images, because a lot of the images and anecdotes that are available online are predominantly press coverage of different events and then which sort of a phenomenon that sort of signals its role as a third place, because a lot of the photos would be in old family cameras and within the power of the people. So after collecting those materials, I would organize them in the timeline and create and integrate them in the website. And then I would basically integrate that map using the research of immigration patterns and the digital map of the store. And then I would also use that 360 video and playlist to integrate into the system. So for my prototype, I made a timeline that will, hold on one second. So this is the website that I created as a sort of accompaniment to hold the timeline. And then going back to the homepage, you can see in the background, these are woodblock paintings from the mid 1800s that show the Shirakia Mon in the background, showing the sort of cultural significance of the store even back then. And then starting off on the timeline, you can see another woodblock painting that shows basically the bustling business center that Shirakia thrived in the late 1600s. And then you can see here, this is what that exact same location would look like in the 1950s and from 1900 to 1950, where it also has the Shirokiyomon. But then as Tokyo absorbs it because of its sort of floundering business model, you'll see that it eventually will rebrand itself under the Tokyo label. And then after being absorbed, we see the opening of the Ala Moana branch. And here the vice president of the time is holding a sketch of the original store from 1959. And then here you can see sort of the sliding between the loss of the Shirokiya branding and how the Shirokiya branding stayed in Hawaii, and that sort of represents the sort of unique cultural role it continues to play, while in Japan, the store would continue to be just a regular department store and close in 1999 as a result of the Japanese economy bursting. And then here we see sort of the threat to the Shirokio stores, to the Hawaii stores. And this is a screenshot from a concurrent House resolution from the Business Committee in March of 2000, where we could see the sort of grassroots desire to revive the store, and the representatives listening to the constituents and responding to the significance of Shirokiya. And then in November 17, 2002, the store reopens again, with the governor declaring it Shirokiya Day. And then here I've integrated various videos that cover news coverage of the closure of the original location and its expansion into a different location that would be, it demonstrates a change in business model from the more department store model into a sort of recreation of the Yokocho back alley shops and restaurants of Japan. And then indefinite closure as a result of the pandemic and ongoing legal disputes with the mall over backlogged payments from pandemic era rent. And just a brief reflection, I started this project with very little understanding of digital humanities. It seemed very nebulous. I didn't really understand it. But throughout this project, I gained a better understanding of how it can play a role in the research process and the sort of expression of your final product in a way that's beyond the analog text format and actually gets the user involved in a way that they can experience the evolution of the story you're trying to tell. So I found Trello in particular to be a useful tool, not for my individual purposes, but as a sort of collaboration between different users and exchanging of information that's necessary for these sort of larger projects. And then digital storytelling methods. Although I only use maps, although I only use timelines in my prototype, I think that maps and timelines and the sort of text analysis that would go before that are particularly useful tools going forward as I investigate other research topics. And then through our discussions in the meetings, it's helped me rethink humanities itself by embracing digital humanities as a new avenue and reassess sort of how I think of a subject, what my audience and purpose is, and how the communities I research inform how I basically disseminate the information. And here are my works cited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was wonderful. And if you would be as well willing to share your website link, then people can get to your timeline, it looks, as well, and have a look and listen to some of those videos. Thank you. So now we have some time to ask our fellows some questions. And so I would just invite you to go ahead and ask your questions to either one or both of this year's fellows about their projects, about their experiences. It's open season for them. If you'd like to put in the chat, I can read it, or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Well, I have one that maybe both of you could answer, whoever would like to go first, which is how did the way the application process worked for this fellowship is that students proposed a topic. So they were coming in with a topic already in mind. But they didn't necessarily know as much about digital humanities, and so like what the project was actually going to look like on the end. So I wonder if both of you would be willing to talk about the way the sort of model project you had in your mind changed from the beginning to the end of your experience in the program. Like, what were you imagining at the beginning and compared to how did it turn out?
I initially sort of had a more specific image, a specific narrative in mind. I was initially starting off with the notion of focusing on how the store would display different art forms and specifically artisans, and sort of tracking the narrative of how a particular craft would basically translate from Japan to Hawaii. But then I quickly discovered that a lot of that information wasn't documented online in my research. So then I basically reassessed and saw, given the information that I had, what story can I tell? And I sort of, in drawing back, I kind of discovered that concurrent evolution of the store with Japanese Americans, their social political influence in Hawaii.
Feel like it was very different for me. For me, I went into it not really knowing what I was going to do, but I felt like this was a whole topic or a story that I wanted to be told on the internet and create something that's more of like a hub that you could easily access different aspects of this information too, instead of being like me and scourging around the internet for it, but instead making it easier for other people who are just curious to come across.
Yeah, Ricky.
Hey, thank you both for amazing presentations. I was struck that, by the fact that you're both kind of working around kind of a similar time, time period. The 50s and 60s is kind of this kind of pivotal moment for, for both of your projects. And I'm just curious, firstly, why you each kind of like are interested, or what kind of drew you to this kind of moment, historically, culturally. But secondly, like how this period, like what, kind of comports to kind of the tools of digital humanities, or the methods of digital humanities. In particular, I'm thinking about just kind of like what's available kind of like archivally, in terms of like the visual record, what's currently known, what gaps in our knowledge there are, just kind of vis-a-vis the kind of that historical moment, and in the present, in the present time. So I guess like first, what's what drew you to this kind of moment, and second, kind of what did you find anything particularly like interesting, or revealing about kind of like what's available archivally from that period of time, in terms of how it kind of is ripe for a sort of project like a DH type project? Thank you.
I think I'll answer your second question first, but I think for me, something that I thought was really interesting while researching all these primary resources and everything was that there is a lot more information in primary resources on Khmer Rouge music. So if you look on YouTube, you'll find like hour-length long like playlists of Khmer Rouge music, and that's all readily available. But if you look for any other artist or smaller artists or things like that, they're completely destroyed. So I thought it was really interesting that, of course, given the Khmer Rouge did destroy all the things before their time, or at least try to destroy most of their things, that at kind of like the aftermath, they're still having their culture the most, or that time period in the music, the most preserved. So I think that was a pretty big gap within my research, and within history, it'd just be kind of more discussions on pop culture during that time period from the 50s and 60s. But to talk about like what kind of inspired this project, that song that we played a little bit in the early on in the presentations, the Champa Bong, which is sung by Sin Si Samut, is actually one of the first Cambodian songs that I liked. Growing up, I wasn't really a huge fan of Cambodian music, and then I came across this one song that was on the piano, and I thought, wow, this is great, and I recognized the script, so I'm going to share it with my dad. My dad was like, oh, this is Champa Bantam Bong. Like, I grew up with this song. I love this song. And then I was like, that's so interesting. And I went through a little rabbit hole, and we ended up here.
For me, in sort of targeting the 50s and 60s, that was sort of recognizing sort of the political absence of Japanese Americans in Hawaii, despite being 30 to 40% of the population at the time. It was especially in politics, it was a lot of the legacy rich business interests that were involved in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy that were involved in politics. So then around the 60s, you see Japanese Americans enter the political force with Daniel Inouye, Spark Matsunaga, and later Patsy Mink. And then sort of as recognizing the store as a third place in the research that I've found, a lot of the materials, especially in Internet Archive, are mentions in tourist guides, basically as a place to experience Japan in Hawaii. And then realizing that there isn't really a lot of social media influence on the ground level where people are posting photos of themselves with their families. And I think that sort of reveals sort of the nature of third places in general, where perversely third places are so significant to culture, but then they're so easily taken for granted, where these are places where you spend time with your family and friends, so you rarely have that sort of perspective to capture the moment. And you sort of, there's a presumption that there's stability and that it will continue on, even though there are sort of outside forces, that outside cultural and economic forces that will change the landscape.
Thank you for that question, and go ahead, Professor Chen.
Let me unmute myself first. For some reason, I cannot mute my my video. I cannot unmute my video. Yeah. So, but anyway, I would like to continue with the question about the inspiration and motivation for you to do the projects, the amazing projects, wonderful work, and to join the Digital Humanities Summer Fellowship Program. So I'm just wondering if your motivation, your inspiration, have anything to do with the courses that you've taken, the professors that you worked with, and the curriculum of your major. So that's my first question. A related question, a second one, is how do you think what you've learned through this project, how that would benefit you in your future studies?
So my inspiration for joining or applying for this project was I watched this documentary series basically about the cultural impact of food, and there was sort of this narrative on immigrant cuisine as immigrants taking their mindset from their homeland and using the new ingredients of wherever they landed up to recreate basically the experience of home. And I sort of identify Shirakia as this sort of hub that, when talking to my friends over the past couple of years, we've really felt this tangible loss of not being able to go there anymore. It's just someplace that we grew up going with our families, and then just like spending a couple hours there. And then, sorry, could you repeat the second part of your question?
The second question is how you think the what you've learned, the tools, the research, the narratives you have constructed would benefit your future work, your future studies.
I think to continue with the first part of the question, a lot of the classes from East Asian Studies, the East Asian Studies department, are particularly pertinent for me in sort of inspiring the trajectory of this project, especially a class on race and nation in East Asia. That was very important. But then going forward, I think understanding how digital narratives can sort of capture these sort of ethereal cultural elements, I think is really probably the primary element that I took away from this experience.
Thank you.
I think a lot of the classes that I've taken at UCI and just my time here has definitely impacted them, because comparative literature is definitely more multimodal in a way, where you will study like film and different other things. So I don't really feel limited in studying different primary resources that I'm not used to. In fact, I kind of invite it as a challenge, and that's something that my classes taught me to embrace in a way. So, and beyond that, I also am currently taking Khmer classes at a different campus. And there, my professor really likes to do music, at least during our spring quarter. So he would be like, oh, let's all sing this song together on like a Zoom, which was very, very interesting. Yeah, so we just sing line by line, but I was like, these songs are really good. And once again, once I went down that rabbit hole, it was at the same time of us learning this in the class. So I said, why not make this into a project? And in terms of transforming all these tools that I learned into something else that I can use in the future, I also do things like web design, and I am very interested in future technology and things like that, as well as the humanities. So I think that exploring these tools and just using them in different ways would really help really feed my curiosity, as well as using them in just, my classes where they say you should make a project for this, and I will be like, okay, great, I use the night lab stuff.
Go ahead, Professor Soderman.
Hello. That was amazing. I learned a lot, and those projects were really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your work. My name is Professor Zoderman. I teach in the Film and Media Studies department. I'm teaching a class this fall on digital narratives. If you are interested in continuing your work and research, maybe on these projects or other things, definitely, yeah, I invite you to take my class. It'd be amazing to have you. You guys have learned a lot of great things. Yeah, I was just wondering, I guess, two quick questions. The first question is, when you do intense research kind of projects like this, I mean, you usually come across like surprising, interesting things, like beautiful things, something unexpected, or like, wow, that was cool. Like you obviously looked at a lot of different materials that you've put on the timeline. I was wondering if you could just share something that you found really surprising or beautiful, or, some discovery that you made in your research. And then the second question is, you working with digital tools sometimes can be hard or facilitate things. I mean, did you get any pushback from using the tools? I mean, did you find that was difficult in your process, or did it run smoothly and it actually facilitates your research and communicating your stories and ideas? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, something that I found really surprising during my research is, I would actually say, like, my overall perspective on Cambodian music in 50s to 70s, as I felt like it related to a lot of different concepts that we find in comparative literature, like how histories get erased and everything. So while I was researching this kind of golden era that was cut off really fast and kind of treated like it wasn't really existent, at least to I don't want to say historians, but I guess people who aren't very aware of what Cambodia is about, it kind of reminded me of different concepts of that. So it just was more of my perspective on the whole country, and like the scene during that time was definitely changed and expanded upon beyond, oh, this whole tragic event happened and then what happened afterwards, but more of the people involved with it as well. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Just about, you were using that timeline tool or using the digital tools. I mean, did that create a more difficult process, or did it facilitate your narrative storytelling? I mean, you have to learn the tools and everything. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about your process and if you struggled with it or you didn't.
Night Lab timeline in particular is not too difficult to use, although with using or comparing between the different tools that we were talked about and like discussed with, it was pretty difficult to determine between different ones, not necessarily because of their usage, but because of what would be most efficient to display for the specific prototype. So I would say that was the biggest hurdle for this.
Just kind of, I guess it kind of answers both questions in a way, but then following what Jenna Lee said about focusing on sort of dynamic images that illustrate because the Night Lab tool is very easy to use, but then it suggests at most using sort of 20 points on a timeline, just so your narrative doesn't get too muddled around. So then focusing on dynamic images, but then also in that process, sort of me eliminating different sort of threads of the narrative that I've discovered throughout the process, where it Shirokiya served as a site for events that demonstrate sort of the evolution of Japanese culture even within Hawaii, where the sort of what I was mentioning before about kimono and aloha shirts, and then serving as a site for sumo wrestlers to basically meet their fans, and sort of that illustrating the history of how in the sumo world the grand champions outside of outside of in terms of foreign grand champions outside of Mongolia, they're all from Hawaii. So then sort of showing that sort of cultural synergy in a way. And then um sorry, um sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Well, thank you so much. That was great.
Well, we are at time, and so I just want to thank everybody for coming, and a special thank you to Janelli and Josh for presenting your work this summer. It was wonderful to hear, and you both did a wonderful job. Round of applause for our fellows this year. Right, and thank you again to everyone for coming. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Madeline, thank you too for your
Oh, it was wonderful.
amazing,
It was my pleasure.
wonderful leadership and work. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, we'll hope to be in touch with everyone again with more exciting work out of this area.